Hi, I'm Laura Glennie and I'm a member of the Support for Learning team at West Lothian College. Um, One of my roles is to sort of coordinate mental health and wellbeing information. Um, and I thought I'd record this session for you today because resilience is a topic that's brought up by almost anyone that works in mental health and wellbeing, but we don't always take the time to really unpack what it means and why working on resilience is a good idea. So that's what this is about today. I hope you enjoy. It's always good to go back and look at how West Lothian College defines and looks at mental health and well-being. And just to make it clear that we're not just talking about you not having a disease or an infirmity or a mental health diagnosis, whatever it is, we're really looking at just supporting our students to cope with the normal stresses of life, to work productively and to feel like you're part of a community. So that definition's on the screen, really just to remind you that it's okay to ask for help. And at our college, we accept that mental health challenges are common, and that's why we do this kind of thing, really. So that's how we see mental health. And well-being, similarly, is really just about how we're doing as individuals, but beyond the sort of the mental side of things. We look at relationships and where we live, and again, we're really looking at dimensions that help you feel satisfied with your life and a sense that what you're doing is worthwhile, and that you can cope with your day-to-day emotional experiences. So well-being is not having anxiety or not having sadness, but it's about feeling that they are manageable and that we experience a range of happiness and sadness and anxiety and these things. So that's what we're looking at, really. So I'm going to go ahead and define resilience from our point of view. And if you can take a moment to review the information on the screen. So resilience can help you deal with pressure and reduce the impact of stress while you're dealing with your well-being and maintaining your well-being and any challenges. So if you can achieve positive outcomes despite challenging circumstances, basically, and as students, you're probably going to face at least one individual challenge or a series of setbacks. And as college students, you might go through some of the most significant changes in your life. So that's why it's a really good point to start addressing resilience. And obviously, it's important to look at what we're not talking about. So again, take a moment to read on the screen. So some of these points are increasingly important, particularly during a pandemic. As students, particularly those who have an interest in mental health and well-being, so hopefully you, if you're watching this video, you've got to remember that difficult feelings are rational and appropriate, or they can be, and it's important to feel your feelings and focus on coping with them rather than diminishing them. So if you can recognize that resilience isn't set in stone in all areas of your life, right? So where you might be able to cope best in one area of your life, like a romantic relationship, for example, it might not be the same if the same thing happened at work. You might cope completely differently. Or you'll feel way more resilient as a parent than as a student, perhaps. You might cope with certain setbacks as opposed to others. Maybe you're amazing in a crisis or a fire, but when it's interpersonal challenges or a funny comment a person said, it's harder. And that's completely normal. Um, so it's really not about just getting over it, not feeling things and coping. Um, Resilience is a lot bigger than that. So let's look at, we've kind of defined resilience, we've looked at it in the context of mental health, but what will you get out of working on your resilience and how could it help? So I think the first image is about how resilience can help us set life goals and feel able to achieve them. So if you are resilient and you're looking to get better at overcoming challenges and obstacles, then you've already identified that challenges are obstacles. They get in the way of your goals and they're not blockages or complete no's, but knowing that things can come up. So if you understand and expect that achieving your goals isn't going to be linear, you can know that it's okay and feel prepared for that. So always being honest with ourselves and knowing what is and isn't our fault and that things will come up If you can gently understand that things might come up or get in the way, then you can be more likely to have realistic expectations about the thing. And that can really help us not feel so knocked when something comes in the way. Another benefit of resilience would be if we're working on a resilience, we're probably more likely to feel independent and like we have more choices in life. So if you're already working on making lifestyle changes to become more resilient, hopefully you'll feel more in control of your options. And that's a really personal one. So where I might need to make lifestyle changes might not be the same as you. A good example might be assertiveness. So if you're someone that needs to work up for standing up for yourself in a calm and positive way, and you feel like you're getting better at resolving conflicts and you're able to do that, then that will make you feel like you're more in control of your options. You might avoid less situations because you're less afraid of conflict, or you might feel more confident to speak up for yourself. But really finding the area that's important for you will help you feel like you have more choices in life. And I think working on resilience will help you be more likely to learn from your mistakes too. So if part of your journey to resilience is remembering to give yourself a guilt-free break when something happens, by getting a change of scenery and walking around the block or doing something nice for yourself, then you're giving yourself the time and the headspace to reflect and recognize your own mistakes. So if you're working on giving yourself a break, hopefully you can feel rested enough to make changes based on your mistake, rather than feeling defensive or tired or fight, flight, and freeze when you make a mistake and maybe someone points it out, or even it's hard to admit to yourself. It's often because we're tired and we've not been given ourselves a break. And there's really good tools for that I can share along with this presentation. There's an exercise called Self-Compassion Break by a researcher called Kirsten Neff. And that's a really good one if that speaks to you. Lastly, working on our resilience will help us better recognise and manage our own feelings, which sounds funny, but it's a challenge for a lot of people. If you're being kinder to yourself and you're working on making realistic goals, blaming yourself less, you can get better at recognising how you truly feel. And I think it's all about just getting informed and prepared for your patterns and how you're likely to feel and listening to yourself. And again, there's so many resources out there to help you do that. A good one is well-being planning, and the college are going to have resources on that. And there's also information from Charlie Waller Trust, the charity, on how you can make a well-being plan. Okay, so this slide here is about thinking about how we react in stressful situations, how they become overwhelming, and what you can use to calm yourself down or cope better. And again, it's pretty personal for everyone. So on the screen, I've got Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory hyperventilating into a paper bag because he is so stressed. But there are protective factors to experiencing toxic, overwhelming stress. And these factors can turn really stressful situations into tolerable ones. So I've kind of put some of those factors in the list here under tolerable stress. And if you're not sure where to start on reducing your stress or which area exactly would be best to help work with that, maybe you could look at this list and think about what the opposite of each thing would be and try and identify which area you feel is causing you most challenges. So think about what would the opposite of self-regulation be, or emotional intelligence. What would the opposite of motivation be? And these behaviours are ideas of areas which you could work on to improve your resilience. That can be a helpful starting point. And now I thought it'd be helpful to point out that if you're here and listening to this presentation, you're probably already on your good steps to looking after yourself and taking this stuff seriously. But knowing what we've said before about expecting obstacles to come in the way, don't feel as though you're a failure if we're not immediately resilient overnight. And overcoming adversity is a big part of this. So I've put together some people that I think are famous failures, using fail in a happy way. That is to say, they've come really far. So looking at the people on the screen, I've got Katy Perry here. Because she's a widely successful singer-songwriter, but I didn't know that how many consecutive failures she had before she was famous. So her first album only sold 200 copies before her record label went out of business, and then she was dropped by two other record labels. And it took 10 years of hard work for her to get her hit song I Kissed a Girl, which felt like it came out of nowhere, really. Um, but we see all of these people who are doing fantastic, but don't necessarily know the history behind it. And I think 10 years of graft in pop music and two or three um, album labels that didn't work out is pretty impressive. And then I put Stormzy up there as well, because he had like Glastonbury in 2019, and I remember watching it and being like completely blown away, so impressed. I loved it. I watched it 3 times on Sky Plus. But I read an interview in the Independent newspaper about his performance after it, and he said that like one of his earpieces broke when he was performing, and he said, I quote, "It was the most difficult thing I've ever done. When I walked off stage, I thought I'd screwed it. I thought it was the worst thing I'd ever done." He came off stage and I thought he'd totally blown it, and he said he was crying for like an hour. He was in hysterics backstage at Glastonbury. He thought he'd messed it up, and he said he was heartbroken. Then, after calming down after an hour, some of the people from Glastonbury gave him like a USB stick to watch the performance back. And then halfway through, he said, "Oh my God, I think it went all right." And I think, firstly, it's really sweet that he told the Independent about that. But also, it's really hard to believe that someone as famous as Stormzy still leaves the stage and like, feels so embarrassed and shaken up and thinks that he's done terrible. And it just goes to show you that failure is so subjective, and it can often be in the minds of the person who feels it too. Um, yeah, and the last one is Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan is a walking, talking, inspirational quote machine. But one of the best things that he said about resilience is, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games 26 times. I've been trusted to take the game winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. And I think when you hear it like that, it's pretty amazing. If Michael Jordan went around holding on to some of the obstacles that have come in the way and said, I might be a good basketballer, but I've lost 300 games. I can't imagine how difficult that would be for him. And it's just a good illustration of being kind to ourselves and how that can really help us go a long way and see reality, that none of us are really failures. The last 3 pictures, the first one's Walt Disney. Walt Disney dropped out of school in a young age. He tried to join the army, and that was a failed attempt. And then he made a business called Laugh-O-Gram Studios, and it went bankrupt because he didn't know how to run a successful business at the time. And then he worked for an American newspaper where he was fired for not being creative enough. And now Walt Disney is like synonymous, is associated with a successful, creative, international business. And it's just pretty amazing how things go. Also, the middle picture, you might not recognize him, but this is Fred Smith, who founded FedEx. So the reason I put him in is his story is pretty unreal. He went to Yale University in the 60s and he did economics. And he wrote a paper on the need for overnight reliable delivery in computerized information age. So to say that you could go on a computer, order something, and it would come the next day. And then his professor's response is, the concept is interesting and well formed, but in order to earn better than a C, the idea must be feasible. As in, nice one, mate, but you'll never manage that. And then obviously several years later, he kept his determination, he kept up, he knew it was a good idea. He used this concept to develop the world's first overnight delivery company. And basically, that's changed transportation forever. So many people use Amazon. So many people get things next day delivery. And if Fred Smith had listened to his professor at Yale, which would have been easy for him to do, maybe this wouldn't have never happened. And maybe he wouldn't have made the fortune that he did today. And the last one is just about, well, Ariana Grande, and about how she's continued to make music despite, as she said, she witnessed the absolute worst of humanity. And she's decided that she wouldn't give the terror-related incident that she witnessed to power. A quote from her in Time magazine that I read was, "The last thing I would ever want is for my fans to see something like that and think that it won." And I just think it's really impressive, really, that she's continued to make a career out of this after all those challenges. So these are my famous failures. And the reason that I've done that is because it's really helpful to rephrase the word fail. The negative connotations around it are kind of made up. Like every word is made up, obviously. But it's a really powerful word that can really hold people back when they're working on the resilience. And one of the fun things that I like to do is write out the word fail. And then, like an acrostic poem where you write the letters out and you think of something for each word. Maybe you could take a moment to pause this video and think of a new meaning to the word fail. There could be a funny one, it could be an empowering one, it could be one that's personal to you. But try write out each letter and think of a way of rephrasing this powerful word. Maybe we can take a bit of the power away from it. Okay, so if you've taken a moment to do that, we can move on. So, who watching this believes that talent is something that you're born with and effort has no effect on the outcome? So that would be called a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset assumes that our character, our intelligence, and our creative ability are all fixed and they're a given, which we can't change in any meaningful way. So that you're born with it and you either have it or you don't. So anyone that says something like, "Oh, I can't even draw a stick figure" when you're in art. But some people believe that with enough work and effort, you can improve your abilities, which is more realistic. So people that don't have a fixed mindset or have a rephrased mindset might say something like, "I'm not able to do that yet, but I'm working on it." And "yet" is a really helpful word. It can help us turn sentences from "I can't draw a person" into "I can't draw a person yet." And we're not asking you to be cheesy, but it is possible to adjust the things which you tell yourself to be more realistic. And that's the point. I love saying "I can't draw a person" and "I can't draw a person yet," for some people might find like a bit of a cheesy or unimportant distinction. But the point is, it's things that we tell ourselves and they're not always actually realistic. Everyone has the capacity to learn to improve to draw a person. So it's helpful to gently correct yourself when you're doing this, what we call black and white thinking or catastrophizing. So, things like "things will never get better," "I'm always completely alone." Things like that are not always the most realistic, and they can really help your brain go down this kind of spiral of thinking that way. So if you can take a moment to think about when you can use the idea of rephrasing your mindset and what exactly are examples that you're going to work on. So if you're scared of failing an exam and you've been telling yourself, "I'm never going to manage this, I'm never going to manage this," make a real effort today to think about how you want to rephrase your mindset and how you're going to gently correct yourself every time that thought reappears for you. Yeah, so I've done out a little sort of demo of what that would look like, but I've put it down as 2 columns: things I may say to myself and things I will say to myself. And then the example is, "This is too hard." And then what I would change that to is, "This is quite hard for me right now, and that's okay." And again, it's just about making sure that we're not beating ourselves up or bullying ourselves with the way that we speak to ourselves. So sitting down and looking about rephrasing your mindset can be super helpful when we're trying to be resilient. And I do encourage you to pause this video and think about that as well. And the reason we do that, like I say, it's not because it's cheesy or because, for any other reason. Exercises like this can be feel small, unimportant, but they're extremely helpful. And that's because your brain can change the way that you think, feel, and react. And our brains are not fixed. And the word for that is neuroplasticity, which is on the screen. So that's when the change that occurs in your brain, basically all the pathways that look like the squiggly wires, which fire off against one another, they can learn to fire off in different ways. And changes can happen from certain factors like behavior. So behavior like watching a resilience session, environment, so things like a difficult or challenging environment, or changing up to be more manageable, or even the way that your brain processes things. So if we know that our brains can be changeable because of neuroplasticity, we also know that our brains can do something called synaptic pruning. And the way I remember that is like, imagine pruning like a plant or a bush or something in the garden. Our brain does the same thing. So it's basically when we can delete connections that are no longer necessary or useful in our brain and strengthen the unnecessary ones. And working on rephrasing your mindset is doing exactly that. It's helping prune or get rid of some of the things that we tell ourselves that are not helpful or realistic. And it's reinforcing, strengthening the things that are more useful and probably closer to the truth, really. So there's some helpful videos out. There's quite a lot of big words when we talk about brains, but there's helpful words and ideas to think about that. If we think about our brain as a ski slope, that can be helpful. There's a little video on it here that I'd love for you to watch, and it's made by Bill Harris, who is a Canadian neuroscientist.
Now, you may have noticed that one underlying premise of everything I've been saying
just now
is that your brain can change, something called neuroplasticity. Here's why this is such a big deal. During most of the 20th century, scientists thought your brain could not change. But in one of the biggest wow were we wrong moments in scientific history, researchers discovered that the brain isn't hardwired. In fact, a ton of research shows that your brain can and does change in response to stimulation, experience, learning, movement, and even thinking. Because of your brain's plasticity, you can change the set ways of thinking, behaving, and being that have held you back. Ironically, though, and I find this to be very interesting, brain plasticity is also what created those negative habit patterns in the first place. Neuroplasticity expert Dr. Norman Doidge, a member of the faculty of both the University of Toronto and Columbia University, told me that the same plasticity that allows us to change what isn't working is also the source of the very self-sabotaging behaviors, bad habits, negative feelings, and other non-resourceful ways of thinking that we want to get rid of. He described neuroplasticity to me using a quite beautiful metaphor. Let's say you're out skiing. On the first run, after a new snowfall, the snow is pliable and plastic, and you have a choice of many different paths down the hill. You have to go around the rocks and trees, of course, in the same way that your early brain development was shaped by your circumstances and experiences while you were growing up. If you have a good first run, you'll probably take a similar path down the hill the second, third, and fourth time. Because the snow is pliable and plastic, though, you'll start to make tracks, which eventually become ruts. Once this happens, it's hard to get out of these ruts and take a different path down the hill. As you develop these ruts, it seems as if you have fewer choices. In the same way, when you were growing up, you created ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that helped you deal with the situations you confronted, and you became the person you are today. These ways of feeling, thinking, acting, and being created certain neural connections and pathways in your brain, which then became habitual and automatic mental ruts. So automatic, in fact, that they happen outside your awareness. Once those ruts are set, we don't even know or consider that they're ruts, and we don't know that there might be another more resourceful way of thinking and doing things. Then we wonder why we can't get or achieve what we want. As these ruts become deeper, or you might say, as these neural pathways become stronger, you begin to think, feel, act, and believe in automatic ways. The choices you had when your brain was like virgin snow diminish, and you begin to operate more and more within the boundaries of those ruts in your brain. Then it begins to look as if how you feel, think, behave, and respond can't be changed, or at least that changing them would be quite difficult. You begin to say to yourself, that's just who I am. Anything you do over and over, anything you practice repeatedly, or any stimulus to which you're repeatedly exposed causes a change in your brain. More neural real estate is turned over to doing it, thinking it, believing it, feeling it, or being it. If you examine the brain of a concert violinist, you'd find that the parts of the brain related to finger movements, hearing the sound, reading music, feeling the rhythm, coordinating playing with the orchestra, and so on, would be greatly expanded compared to the same parts of the brain in people who don't play the violin 8 hours every day.
Phew, that's a lot of information. I've mentioned some tools through this, like self-compassion breaks, or developing a wellbeing action plan, and I'll be sure that you've got access to all of this information. And we can always run sessions on these tools if there's an interest. But the main message here is there's a genuine case for developing positive coping strategies and building ways that work for you into your routine and forming positive habits. So, for example, while many people know that coffee can mimic the effects of anxiety, people might still drink it for years, even when they've got anxiety. I'm guilty as charged, but it's these little things that can actually affect you on a daily basis. Another example would be that people know breathing exercises can help. Some people find them cheesy. But the point is, we don't always seek alternatives to self-soothe, so we can know that we do probably drink too much coffee, or that we really could try and do a breathing thing and don't do it. But are we replacing this with alternatives that we like or we can manage? Are we looking for different ways? Like, I don't know, turns out decaf coffee is fine, or turns out this style of breathing is fine. And it's important to cover and have a sincere effort on the basics like meditation, working on a growth mindset, things like that to improve your resilience. All the protective factors that we mentioned before. Sometimes when we're looking to cope with life, we can try and change things outside of us, like our friends, our house, our job, or our school. But it's also helpful to learn to be present and cope in the moment, and that's what those things can do. So there is alternative forms of meditation and breathing. When I've worked in schools before, I've shown my young people an Australian resource called Reach Out Australia, and to be honest, they helped me too. I prefer the style of breathing and meditation. The rain sounds of beach waves type doesn't do it for me. But I watch videos like My Wi-Fi is a Piece of Crap meditation, and that really helps me. Something that I typed into YouTube, and you can do the same. But basically, just because one method doesn't work doesn't mean that we're not going to find something that's really going to help us be more resilient. I encourage people to try box breathing. This feels accessible and easy to translate. So you might be familiar with this if you've done yoga or even been in the military, because I've heard that Navy SEALs do this to calm down. But box breathing is basically when we're still and we imagine for 5 seconds a box being drawn in the air as we breathe in, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we hold our breath, or we pause the breath where it is for an additional 5 seconds and imagine the next side of the box being drawn out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we exhale and we imagine the box being drawn out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we hold again for 5 while the box gets completed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's like just imagine that box. Maybe try 5 rounds of it. So breathe in for 5, pause. Breathe out for 5, pause. 5 times. And see how you feel after that. So there is these day-to-day coping strategies that you can start bringing in right now. And if you find one that works for you that you'd sincerely like to do, even better. But I'd suggest that coming along and listening to people that are giving suggestions on resilience is a really good start. And I can really thank you for that and your commitment to improving on this stuff. But I'm always looking to improve and create more opportunities for us to learn these kind of things at West Lothian College. So if you want to find out more, or you have any questions, or you wish you could elaborate on something, my email is on the screen. So it's lglennie@west-lothian.ac.uk. I just wanted to thank you for listening to me for this session, and I hope you got something out of it. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later.